CNN welcomed back Jeffrey Toobin as the network's chief legal analyst this week. He's been off the air for 8 months after touching himself on camera during a Zoom call with colleagues at The New Yorker.
There were some really cringe moments during Toobin's first segment. Let's take a look at one.
I guess I'll recap. I'll do the honors.
Help yourself.
Okay. In October, you were on a Zoom call with your colleagues from The New Yorker magazine. Everyone took a break for several minutes, during which time you were caught masturbating on camera. You were subsequently fired from that job after 27 years of working there. And you, since then, have been on leave from CNN. Do I have all that right?
You got it all right. Sad to say.
Sad to say. This is hilarious. So Alison Camerata, by the way, is sort of a very famous accuser of Roger Ailes of sexual harassment. And so I think it's very interesting that she was the one who brought Jeffrey Toobin back into the CNN fold after 8 months. This story is like tempting to just laugh at constantly because it is absolutely hilarious. I mean, Jeffrey Toobin, for all of the media's talk for years and years about Me Too and about predatory male behavior and all of that, Jeffrey Toobin comes back onto CNN after, and like I get, he talks about in the segment that it was an accident. It was an accident. He just accidentally masturbated in front of his female colleagues virtually. And I do believe him that it was an accident. But CNN would not extend this generosity to somebody who weren't an entrenched sort of institution of the media like Jeffrey Toobin is. And by the way, that doesn't make him qualified as the chief legal analyst. It makes him a regurgitator of conventional wisdom that is so often wildly off the mark. But that's really what CNN does. So it's easy to see why they would want him back, because he's just an incredible asset in their mission of regurgitating nonsense conventional wisdom.
Well, and maybe now with far less leverage.
Yeah.
Well, it's like one in a long line of, quote, cringe-worthy moments via Zoom. So everybody just make sure your Zoom cameras are off, or make sure your cameras are off during the calls. But this is kind of really ridiculous, and it's not only is the regurgitation of why he was suspended from CNN and fired from The New Yorker cringeworthy, the whole situation just blows my mind continuously, and I almost don't even know what to say about it, right?
Well, listen, he apologized. We actually have a clip of that. We can start here.
We've heard what I like to think of as the politician apology, which is, I'm sorry if you were offended, which always sounds to me like I've said the words, now get off my back. That's exactly what I've tried not to do. I mean, I have tried, and I'm trying now, to say how sorry I am, sincerely, in all seriousness. Above all, I am sorry to my wife and to my family, but I'm also sorry to the people on the Zoom call. I'm sorry to my former colleagues at The New Yorker. I'm sorry to my current, fortunately still, colleagues at CNN. And I'm sorry to the people who read my work and who watched me on CNN and who thought I was a better person than this. And so, I got a lot to rebuild, but I feel very privileged and very lucky that I'm going to be able to try to do that.
I, too, am so sorry to the people who thought Jeffrey Toobin, who has a checkered history, especially when it comes to women and mistresses, was a better person than that. I am so sorry you had that misconception, and I'm really sorry if you buy what he's selling right now. I love how he worked self-congratulations into his apology. I'm trying not to do the typical political apology. I'm trying not to do that. I'm better than that. It's unbelievable. And by the way, Jeffrey Toobin is being afforded way more grace than any normal American worker ever would be. I'm actually all for grace and forgiving people when they make mistakes, as this, I do believe, genuinely was a mistake. Sure, I'm all for extending grace to people, but the average American would not be brought back to their job after 8 months, given the severity of his mistake. He is getting so much more grace, so much more kindness from CNN than I think he deserves, and so much more than what the average American would get in a similar situation. question.
100%. And, Emily, I'm really interested in your take on why. And why would CNN bring him back? I mean, New Yorker said, no, we've got enough.
Yeah.
Why does CNN bring him back on? It's not like they can't find another legal analyst.
I have no idea. I think he's probably just really good friends with the executives and the leadership there who see this through, it's always interesting when something like this happens to a person that you know or a person that you respect. You actually do have so much more grace and understanding. And sometimes that's a really bad thing. That's how the sort of swamp and the entrenchment in the establishment works, is that people extend goodwill to others, to bad actors who make big mistakes and don't suffer consequences for them that set norms and create disincentives for bad behavior. And so that's sort of how power protects itself. And I'm assuming the same thing is happening here. What is incredible about this is CNN is usually the ethics police. Like, they're constantly sounding the ethics alarms about everybody, generally as long as they're on the right. CNN is hysterical about it. And this is just completely, I think, is undermining their credibility. The fact that actually after the story about Jeffrey Toobin and his mistress, CNN continued to use him so much, I think speaks to where that credibility ever was in the first place. But Jeffrey Toobin, what is the value, as you just said, in putting him back on your airwaves? I think that they probably just he probably just has a lot of goodwill banked up with somebody, maybe it's Jeff Zucker at CNN, who's in charge of these things and is extending that grace and goodwill to him as a personal friend, even though it's really, it's just not worth it, you would think, from a business perspective, from a journalistic integrity perspective, from the perspective of your sort of ethical obsessions and the credibility of your ethical obsessions. I have no idea, but I'm assuming that's probably what it was.
It harkens back to what your kind of brilliant radar brought up, which was, there are different ethical standards and different standards of judgment for different people depending on where they are.
Yes.
And this is a very clear example of that, in my opinion.
Yes, it absolutely is. This is how power protects power. It's how power benefits from that protection. And Jeffrey Toobin, again, is a hilarious, but also a kind of sad example of exactly how that works in the ranks of our newsrooms, which, by the way, operate on the currency of trust and operate on sort of, if you want to be the ethics police, you need to have some credibility. I don't think anybody around the country who knows what happened to Jeffrey Toobin, and that story was mega viral when it came out. It wasn't an insular media story. Thinks that he's a super credible individual anymore. So it really speaks to how these newsrooms operate in their own bubbles and how they are controlled by powerful people with different interests than serving their audience and in bringing you good coverage of the news. That's just really not their priority at the end of the day, even from a business perspective. It's quite ridiculous.
The disconnect is palpable, and this is a clear example of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll be back with more Rising after this.